Hello. I'm delighted to be speaking today at the Happy Parent Equals Happy Child conference on the hugely important topic of how drinking can erode our relationships with our children, often in subtle and yet compounding ways. So, I'm going to be taking you through some material that talks to the epidemic of alcohol use today and how enmeshed and normal it is in our society. And I want to help to open up the conversation around alcohol use at home and across all aspects of life. You know, so many of us just don't talk about it. It's a tricky subject. And of course, for some people, it can be triggering. It can be tangled up with secrets and shame and denial. So let's understand it more so we can make mindful choices for ourselves and our families. And we can start to think about how we can talk openly with our children around alcohol. My name is Jill Mackay. I'm a sobriety coach with Inquisitive Coaching. I work with professional, successful women who want to break free from the hold that alcohol has on their lives and start living a life of freedom, excitement, and contentment. I have a background in neuroscience, and I believe that we can all benefit from building some awareness of how we can keep our brains healthy and enable our brain to work with us and not against us. And yet, despite this background and my knowledge, I have been a drinker since I was 15 until I quit in my early 50s. It's a long time. My support system consisted of Sauvignon Blanc, Albarino, Pinot Grigio, Prosecco, and the occasional sweet dessert wine. I drank through the highs and lows of my studies, my marriage, the birth of our three beautiful children, the ups and downs of being a parent, of the chaos and gorgeous mess of family life, through caring for elderly parents and in laws, through career moves, promotions, and setting up my coaching business. I drank to celebrate, to mourn, and to socialize. It was just what I did. And I was a high functioning, successful businesswoman, wife, mum, daughter, sister, and friend. And like many women, I felt I was superwoman. And yet, the more demand I put on myself and the more that was expected of me at home and at work, the more I drank. Until one day in early 2017, I realized that I could do something about those expectations. There were expectations I was putting on myself. I felt like the worst mum in the world. I was utterly exhausted, fraught, a shadow of who I really was. I didn't like who I was becoming, and or the fact that I was lying to myself about how much I was drinking and my ability to control it. So I stopped. Now, today's presentation, it's not about encouraging you to stop drinking, not at all. Many people are able to take it or leave it and enjoy an occasional drink. What I'm offering today is about building awareness of and being mindful around our drinking behaviors around our children. Alcohol is so much in our world, it's so much part of what we do that we may not realize the impact it's having on our children's perception of the world or of what family life is really all about, what they take from it, what they learn from it, and how that plays out in their own adult life in the future, their own adult experience. So here's an overview of what I'm covering today in the short time that we have. I'm going to start by talking about how enmeshed and integrated into our culture alcohol actually is, and therefore how natural it is to maybe not have considered this topic before. I'll then give you the big picture about alcohol use and abuse, and the increase in home drinking since the pandemic. And I'm also going to share with you some survey data from the Institute of Alcohol Studies around the impact that drinking in front of our kids can have. And I'm going to close with some suggestions to help with positive modeling with your kids. And then throughout the talk, I'm also going to talk and share how I was brought up around occasional drinking and what my children have told me about how my drinking impacted them. So let's get going with how entwined alcohol is in our culture. Ever since the first grapes were fermented into wine, drinking has been part of the human experience. There are references to alcohol in the Bible and in the Quran, and ancient Greek, Roman, and pagan cultures are still renowned today for their pretty outrageous drinking habits. Drinking has long been a way to bring people together in celebration and socializing. If you think about it, we toast monumental occasions like weddings and graduations. We commiserate the hard times together over hard liquor. And we throw massive parties when young people reach the legally drinking age. And as parents, we have these get togethers to wet the baby's head. So even when our kids are tiny weeny, we're celebrating their existence with the booze. So here are some examples of how entrenched alcohol is in popular culture. Can then lead on to an unhealthy glorification of it that may encourage dangerous drinking habits, both in adults and the young. So let's start with television and adverts. So while really young children may not watch these programs I'm going to mention, they may have some awareness of them or some exposure to them. They may see them in the background, and teenagers certainly have seen them. So in the past decade, alcohol consumption has become increasingly common on TV series like The Good Wife and How I Met Your Mother. These frequently depict fictional characters consuming lots of alcohol, and other shows like Comedy Central's Drunk History, they use alcohol consumption as the main attraction. So they show intoxication and being drunk as harmless and entertaining. And substance use is often depicted by the leading characters in sitcoms and especially in soap operas. And of course, additionally, alcohol brands will typically feature beautiful models, sports stars, and other successful celebrities in the adverts. Alcohol consumption is constantly being rammed down our throats as being associated with glamorous and affluent lifestyles. And one study identified 534 films, finding that more than half of them contained at least one alcohol brand appearance. It also found that 19.2% of G or PG, that's general level or parental guidance rated movies, that they contain specific alcohol brand placements. It's massive. And another study from Northwestern University in the States found that 22% of songs on the Billboard's top Hot 100 list mentioned alcohol. That's the equivalent of the charts here in the UK. Drinks are sold in most restaurants, in supermarkets, and event venues. You're able to buy alcohol 24/7 with relaxation of the licensing laws. We encourage our peers to drink to excess. Consuming vast quantity of drink is a badge of honor. And I have seen t-shirts with brash phrases like AA is for quitters. I was recently looking for a birthday card for a friend. I counted 21 cards in a local supermarket with headlines like, May your birthday be filled with cake, cheap cocktails, drunken text, and poor decisions. Hmm. Alcohol related cards were more than half of the options for female birthdays. And I remember my son saying to me on one of my birthdays many years ago that my cards had a bottle of booze on them. And why weren't there any pictures of flowers or cute animals? However, I think one of the things I saw recently that most shocked me was in a Build-A-Bear shop where you could purchase a t-shirt for the teddy bear with this slogan, it's wine o'clock somewhere, or a lovely pink one emblazoned with rosé over roses, only on sale as a gift set for 32.50 with your teddy bear. You can even buy a toy bottle of Cabernet. Wow, what are we teaching our kids? So I talked to one of the managers in the shop who says that she regularly hears mums persuade their young daughters to buy these outfits for their teddies. Here are some t-shirts showing you on the screen. I was probably the only person to buy them as an example of how entwined alcohol is in our society. So alcohol's everywhere. It's all around us. It's normal. Now, the real world implications of this kind of marketing in popular culture, it's led to numerous cases of underage drinking and healthy trends in alcohol consumption in both youngsters and adults. And according to the UK's Social Issues Research Centre, the SIRC, despite knowing the health consequences of overdrinking, alcohol's continued popularity is largely due to our need for social interaction, which has, of course, has been exacerbated by being locked down during the pandemic in the last couple of years. Drinking's always been a social activity, and humans, like all primates, we're social creatures. We crave connection with our fellow man. And if bonding over a cold beer or a tequila shot or a bottle of Chardonnay will help, we seem to be more than happy to oblige. And whenever we socialize with drink with our kids around, we are subtly teaching them we need the drink to have a good time. So I want to now give you some statistics so you can see the big picture. And these numbers come from the World Health Organization's Global Status Report on Alcohol and Health in 2018. They're actually the latest reported numbers, so they don't include the pandemic. I'm sure there will be an impact from the pandemic, and now, especially with that hybrid work at home model, but those global numbers, they're yet to be released. So my purpose here isn't to shock anyone. But unless we're really informed, then how can we make decisions about our own alcohol consumption and how we want to integrate alcohol into our lives more mindfully in the future? So here are the key slides, the key facts, which you can see on the slides, and I'm going to read them to you. So the World Health Organization says that the harmful use of alcohol is a causal factor in more than 200 disease and injury conditions. Worldwide, 3 million deaths every year result from harmful use of alcohol. This represents 5.3% of all deaths. Overall, 5.1% of the global burden on disease and injury is attributable to alcohol, as measured in disability adjusted life years. Beyond health consequences, the harmful use of alcohol brings significant social and economic losses to both individuals and society. Alcohol consumption causes death and disability relatively early in life. And in people aged 20 to 39 years, approximately 13.5% of total deaths are attributable to alcohol. It's young. There's a causal relationship between harmful use of alcohol and a range of mental and behavioral disorders, other what are called non-communicable conditions and injuries. And earlier this year, the NHS published some research from the Institute of Alcohol Studies and the University of Sheffield, both of which agree that there's likely to be a high toll of extra alcohol related premature deaths, disease, and hospital admissions within 2 decades due to the heavy home drinking during the pandemic. Wow, this could cost the NHS billions more than what it already does, and it's already under massive strain, as we know. The NHS recommended guideline is 14 units a week. By the way, that isn't a safe limit. The idea of counting alcohol units was first introduced in the UK in 1987, and it was introduced to help people to keep track of their drinking, not to recommend a safe limit. So, not to be pedantic or picky, the totally safe limit, of course, is 0. But the guidelines are a recommended level to minimize the other health dangers. So research shows that in the UK, the proportion of us drinking more than that 14 units a week is still 1 in 5 of us, nearly a third of men and 1 in 6 women. And according to the Global Drug Survey, Britons get drunk an average of 51.1 times a year. That's once a week. And 1 in 10 adults are drunk on 5 or more days of a week. And 2/3 of people who drink over 14 units say they'd find cutting down on their drinking harder to do than other lifestyle changes like exercising more, say reducing smoking or improving their diet. Now, I don't have the statistics of how much of this drinking is done in the home, but even if it is just half, then a proportion of that is bound to be in front of our kids and our family. And there really has been a switch in recent years, not just because of the pandemic, from drinking in pubs to buying alcohol in supermarkets and off licenses, which of course means that children now see their parents drinking more than before, and certainly during and since the pandemic. So, however you dress alcohol up, it is a molecule that taps into our brain chemistry to produce a whole range of effects, including in some people, addiction. And really, until we appreciate that, we really are underestimating its power. And the only difference between alcohol or any other drug is alcohol is legal. And alcohol causes problems not just because of the harm it does to the individual who is drinking, but also the harm it does to other people too. All that passive drinking and the challenges that has on families. You just need to go to an accident and an emergency department across the UK, particularly on a Friday or a Saturday night, to see the harm that it's causing day in, day out. And of course, we all hope that none of this applies to us. Most of us can enjoy alcohol's short term effects, the fun, the sociability, and the relaxation, and then hope, of course, that those long term health damages won't happen to us. But if you are drinking above or even just slightly below the 14 units a week that's recommended as the mid maximum level, you do need to keep informed about the risks and be aware so that you can continue to make mindful decisions for your life. So, now let's move on to some studies around drinking around our children. In 2009, Professor Liam Donaldson, who was then the chief medical officer, he warned that exposing children to drink-fueled events was one of the root causes of the UK's drinking problem. And according to a more recent report from the Institute of Alcohol Studies, how much you drink, how often you say things like, "Oh, that's nice," while imbibing, and whether you use alcohol as a reward or coping mechanism, that can all encourage adolescents to drink. The report's really interesting, and it looked at parents who drink within the government guidelines, so 14 or under units a week. And they found that parents often assume their children don't notice they're drinking, but in fact, of course, they do. They found that half of parents had been tipsy in front of their children, while nearly a third said they had been drunk. And such behavior can trigger family rows or make kids anxious. Children can tell the difference in the levels of inebriation, the difference between being merry and perhaps overdoing it. And one in five kids said that they'd been embarrassed by their parents drinking. Others said that parents had forgotten their bedtime or argued with them more than usual. So, even moderate drinking by parents can leave our children feeling embarrassed or worried or lead to their bedtime routine being disrupted, according to this study. And it's actually interesting because it's the first evidence that even lower level parental drinking, as in no more than that 14 units a week, the NHS recommended top level, it's the first evidence that that can prove damaging to children. And of course, kids who see a parent tipsy or drunk, they're less likely to see them as a positive role model, or they're likely to think that that's normal and how they should be. So here are some specific findings. 15% of kids have asked their parents to drink less. 16% of parents have felt guilty or ashamed of their parenting as a result of their drinking. 12% of children said their parents paid them less attention because of their drinking. 11 and 12-year-olds described alcohol as like sugar for adults and said that parents drink to solve their problems. It's so interesting what children notice. The report has clear guidelines for parents like don't glamorize alcohol, talk about its risks as part of a conversation around alcohol, and don't talk about your hangovers because your children will then think it's normal to feel sick or even throw up and have a headache after a drinking session rather than just enjoying an occasional glass of wine. The former health minister, Caroline Flint, I think she worked in Tony Blair's government, so it's a wee while ago, but she commented on this report after it was published saying, "We too quickly dismiss parental drinking as harmless fun and relaxation." But this report shows that people do not need to be regularly drinking large amounts for their children to see a change in their behavior and experience problems. And a gentleman called Professor Ingeborg Rosso from the Norwegian Institute for Alcohol and Drug Research, he says, interestingly, that the evidence isn't strong enough for any sort of formal recommendation, as there's such a mix of influences that play a lead to a child going on to develop a drink problem as an adult, so as well as parental drinking. So things like alcohol marketing, peer pressure, and the genes that influence how much you drink, they're also in play. Even so, he does say that parents who drink in front of their kids, and if they overdo it, they could be making their young children feel unsafe and their older ones mortified. And he offers a great piece of advice, which I really like. He says, treat parenting like driving. Don't go over the limit. So let's be careful about our actions around alcohol and also our language. How many of us have actually said the words, "Oh, I need a drink," today? How many times have we said that this year? It's a throwaway line that we might say while we're stuck in the traffic and we're fed up, while we're driving the kids home from school, or when we've been having a difficult conversation on the phone. But those four little words can have a big impact. By talking about our need for a drink, we're sending the message that a drink can help us cope with day-to-day stress or recover from a busy or a bad day. I what it would feel like if we said something different like, "Oh, I need a good night's sleep," or "I need a hug." You know, that come across like. And we mustn't assume that children are too young to understand this concept. We don't give kids enough credit, says Dr. Vicky Fan. She's an addiction psychiatrist and a lecturer at Monash University. She says we don't give children enough credit and that they often understand far more than we think they do. She says that there are healthy ways that we can treat drinking on special occasions. So, if you're going to be drinking around your children, then explain it's something that's for special occasions and not something that you do every day. Just have one drink and let your kids see you saying no to a second one. So, letting them know that it's okay to say no to alcohol, that is a really important part of modeling good behavior. She goes on to say that if you want your child to have a good relationship with alcohol, it's about positive modeling. Don't get drunk in front of them. Say no to alcohol so they can see that's okay. Don't drink and drive. Don't use alcohol as a way to cope with stress. And have a conversation with them about why it's not a good idea to start drinking young, as their brains are still developing. So, definitely some good advice there. Parents have a major influence on young minds. And if we're behaving badly, it may follow that our kids will too, or at the very least be negatively impacted by what they see. By watching us, children learn how to navigate the world from their first steps and their first words to how they treat and speak to other people, how they build relationships. So I want to now share a little bit of my own story with both my own parents and then my children, as it may offer you some food for thought. So I was lucky, I was brought up in a really, really happy family. I had wonderful parents. They were both doctors. My mum worked part-time, and I recall as a child being really proud of having a working professional mother. Not many of my friends did. And when she came home from work at around 3 or 4 in the afternoon, she did two things, which I believed as a youngster was what working women did, that it was normal. Firstly, she had half an hour's nap, or she put her feet up for half an hour. And then, before she started to cook the meal for our family, she had a small glass of sherry. I recall her deliberating between the Harvey's Bristol Cream or the Croft Original brands. I can still see her doing that. Now, being the cheeky child that I was, at around about 15, I asked if I could join her in the sherry ritual, which she amazingly agreed to. And I had this special time with my mum every day for 3 years after school. So you can see how having a wee drink with someone you love, giving you dedicated attention, how that can grow into such a strong association for me as a youngster and important to me in my adult life. I associated alcohol with love, with attention, with inclusion and belongings. And these are strong feelings, and I have hardwired alcohol to my ability to have them. Now, my own children, they're all now young adults at 19, 24, and 25. They've talked to me about how they felt about my drinking when they were younger. They've told me that I am so much more present now. I'm more available. They feel I really listen and they feel I prioritize them. My son, who's my eldest, he says I used to live my life like it was a constant party. That was his observation. My middle child, a daughter, she saw that I was numbing out my overwhelm and grief of my own parents' deaths and felt she just couldn't penetrate that medicated wall I didn't realize I'd put up. She really felt isolated from me. And then my youngest told me that she thought she was being compared with a glass of wine every day when she came back from school. She remembers vividly me saying things like, "Wait a minute, let me pour a drink," which in her world meant, "Yes, I want to talk to you, but I need a glass of wine first." The wine being more important. I just wasn't mindful around my drinking behaviors with my children. And of course, I deeply regret that. What I hadn't done when planning my family was unravel my own background alcohol story. My parents really weren't big drinkers, so on the face of it, you might think it's not a big alcohol story. But I hadn't asked myself overtly and consciously how I was going to behave around alcohol with my own children. Yet I did around drugs. Now, interestingly, my youngest doesn't drink at all, and she was really nervous about starting university last year as a non-drinker. She was worried that she would not be included. But it's fantastic. She's found that quite a few students just aren't interested in drinking either these days, and that people like her for her, not for what she has in her glass. That's a really important message. She shared with me that she doesn't want to feel out of control like she thought I was. That hurt. And she just doesn't like the taste. She's also shared with me that she's really proud of me for quitting during a challenging time in my life after my own parents died. Yeah, I'll take that. So we all know that there isn't an instruction manual for parenting. And, even if there was, that instruction manual couldn't possibly apply universally to everyone because all families are different. We have different backgrounds, we have different values, expectations, hopes, and dreams. And we have different alcohol stories, different alcohol histories. Our beliefs about alcohol will largely have been formed and shaped through how we were exposed to it when we were young. But universally, I do believe that we all set out to be as good as we can as parents, to be positive role models, to bring our children up to be good human beings, to be resilient, confident, and be able to navigate the complex world that we live in. And without realizing it, we sometimes role model behaviors that children don't understand or they can't process. It's what we're doing is adult activities. And of course, alcohol is one of them. So I hope this presentation has given you some ideas and some food for thought about being mindful around your use of alcohol with your own children, whether they're youngsters or teenagers or young adults. So here is a summary of the tips I've already mentioned throughout the talk, and some of them have come from formal research. Here we go. Don't glamorize alcohol. Don't get drunk in front of your kids. Never drink and drive. Talk about alcohol's place in life and its role in socializing. Have an honest conversation about the risks. Avoid showing or talking about hangovers. Treat drinking like driving. Don't go over the limit. Mind your language. Instead of, "I need a drink after a hard day," say something like, "I would love a hug." Show your kids you don't use alcohol as a response to being busy or stressed. Explain alcohol is traditional for special occasions, but not essential. Explain also that alcohol's not something you do every day. Tell your kids it's okay to say no to alcohol and not just because you're driving or on antibiotics. Explain about their developing brains and alcohol is not a good idea as a youngster. Kids' brains are not fully formed until they're 25. They're kids, not mini adults. And I'm going to leave you with this final tip, which I think sums it all up. Be a mindful role model around alcohol. And when you're doing that, you're doing great. So thank you for listening. My details are on the screen if you want to be in touch to learn about my sobriety programs, or you can follow me on LinkedIn and Instagram, where I post every weekday. Thank you for listening. Bye for now.